Front and back end development used to commonly be two very isolated roles. However, now that we are out of the Stone Age and have multiple languages, frameworks, and even more frameworks built on top of existing frameworks, these two roles that were once very isolated are now joined ever closer together. Nowadays, the combination of front and back end development, or better known as full stack, is a common role and it's something you'll see a lot of companies searching for. So, if you want to know the secret sauce to becoming a LeetCode certified full stack developer, the best way is to build stuff. And that's what this video is going to run through today. We'll go through the overarching steps you need to think about when building a full stack web application. Let's start with step 0, planning. We need to have an idea of what we're going to build and plan out how we're going to build it, what the app will be about, and what it will need to get to an MVP. An MVP stands for minimal viable product, or more simply described as your app in its most basic working shape without all the endless features you'll undoubtedly want to add. Today we're going over the build of a contact list app. And basically, I want my app to be able to catch your contacts like a regular contact list in your phone, and I also want to track history of my contacts whenever an interaction is made with them, like calls or bookings, which I'll generically describe as events. So for my contacts, I know I need to be able to do all the basic CRUD operations, which are creating, reading, updating, and deleting my contacts. I'll also want the same for my events. Lastly, I want people to be able to actually log in and use my app, so I'll also have users, hopefully. These three entities are enough for me to get to an MVP of my app, and with these three pieces in mind, I'm able now to start thinking about database. So, unlike what you'll see from most coding tutorials online, using MongoDB isn't the answer to everything. The majority of applications are in fact relational, and today will be no different. Our app will have interactions or events that are related to contacts, and I'll assume most things I want to add in down the road are also going to have a relationship to those contacts. So the database I'm going to be using is MySQL. To set this all up, I can create a few tables using SQL, which will have the relationships I need. I'll create the contacts table, which will have columns for a name, phone number, email, and I'll also have a contact ID column, which I'll set up as a auto-incremented sequential number. And then I can create my events table, which will have a column for a short description, details, and time of event. In the events table, I'll also need to add a contact ID column, which will be set up as a foreign key. This is so we can perform simple queries against the event table and easily find any events related to a certain contact. I'll also set up my user table with columns for a name, email, and password. Okay, now that we have our database organized, we can now start thinking about the back end. The back end is the server that will handle all the requests made from the front end. Its job will be to authenticate users and pull data from our database. I'm going to be using Node.js with Express today to set up my backend server. However, you could do this in whatever language or framework you're familiar in. Some other common options would be C# with .NET, Python, or PHP. Firstly, I want to create an API or route to handle sign up for my users. So I'll set up a function which can take in an email address and password. This function will check if there is already a user with the same email in the users table we set up earlier, and if there isn't, we'll create the user and send a successful message response back. If we find the email already exists, we'll send back a 400 response error. Also, make sure you hash your passwords before you store them to the database using some form of hashing method. Storing passwords as plain text on your database imposes big risks to your users and application should an intruder gain access. To help me implement this, I'm using a package called bcrypt. Now that we can create our users in our database, we want them to be able to log in. As part of the login flow, I'll be using JSON Web Tokens, aka JWTs. We'll set up a similar function which takes in an email and password, except this time we'll look up the email in our users table and check if the password hash provided matches what's currently in the database. If it does, we'll create a token and send it back to the user. This way, when the user needs to make future requests, they can just use the token instead of providing their password and email for every request. With our users sorted, it's time to move to the meat and bones of any backend server, CRUD. Our backend server needs to be able to handle requests which allow us to perform all the CRUD operations on our events and contacts table. So I'll set up routes for both of these entities which accept get, post, put, and delete requests to handle these respectively. To make sure not just anybody can access these routes, I'll also want to make sure they're protected. So I'll set up some auth middleware which can check if there is a valid token in the header of each request to make sure the request is coming from someone who is authenticated. To help implement this, I'll be using a library called Passport. Now with our routes in place and set up to be totally impenetrable, we can now move to the front end. Now with front end development, there really is so many ways you can build front end these days, and though this is a video about web development, front ends could also carry on to mobile or desktop apps as well. But today I'm using React. You could of course do this with any modern framework like Vue.js, Svelte, Angular, or just go with good old HTML, CSS, and vanilla JavaScript. The front end is quite simple for our MVP. I've got a login page and then a home page for authenticated users. The dashboard page displays all my contacts, and if I click on a contact, it will also show any historical events. Lastly, the front end has a couple forms which allow us to interact with our backend API routes on the server for creating new contacts or events. Hopefully now you have a good overview of some of the steps you need to take when building a full stack web app. Subscribe for more content just like this.